to the Gary Sutton Show, hour number 2 here on WSBA on a Wednesday morning. As we take a look at yesterday's Supreme Court ruling, Joe Hicks is a member of the Project 21 Black Leadership Network. He's the vice president of Community Advocates Incorporated, a privately funded Los Angeles-based political think tank. He is also a former head of the Human Relations Commission from 1997 to 2001 in Los Angeles, and he's with us here on the Gary Sutton Show. Joe, great to have you back. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hey, it's always good to be with you, Gary.
Joe, the Supreme Court came out with a ruling yesterday regarding affirmative action in universities in Michigan. And while it was not a precedent-setting ruling for all other states, it did kind of, lay out some new rules as far as the voters were concerned in Michigan. Talk a little bit about it from that particular standpoint.
Well, it doesn't seem like a very sweeping ruling at first blush, but we're people like myself who've battled this issue of racial preferences around the country for a number of years are quite pleased with the outcome. Back in 2006, the Michigan voters approved a measure. 58% of the voters went to polls and approved a measure that banned the use of racial preferences in public employment, contracting, and education. That was challenged by a bunch of leftist groups, including the ACLU and others. It bounced around the courts, finally went to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals said the people of the state of Michigan, this is what's so appalling here, this court, federal court, told the people of Michigan, you don't have the right to alter your state constitution to ban affirmative action, something we call racial preferences. That went all the way up the U.S. Supreme Court, and yesterday the U.S. Supreme Court, in a very broad 6-2 ruling, by the way, this is almost unprecedented. Usually you get 5-4. This was 6-2. Even some of the liberal judges joined the conservatives on this vote. And what the ruling essentially said was, people in a state do have the right to do all sorts of things, including banning the use of racial preferences. So what it does, it sends signals to a lot of states around the country that are either contemplating similar kind of measures or already have passed such measures. California, where I'm talking to you from today, has done so. They did that back in 96 as well. Washington State has a similar ban. Arizona has a similar ban. Michigan passed a similar ban. So it sends signals to states that are considering such measures. We can do it, and it's constitutional, and they don't have to worry necessarily about, other courts laying their votes aside.
It's interesting in this case, which I believe is called Schuett versus the I'm losing my place here for a second, but the Schuett case here versus Coalition to Defend Affirmative Action. You did it in California. You're familiar with that particular one because obviously you're there in that state. And a lot of people who are opposed to getting rid of affirmative action say, well, the numbers of people have gone down now who were, a minority before. But others might argue that are they going down, or are the numbers authentic in terms of who's actually qualifying for university and so forth? What would your take be on that?
Well, that's exactly the point. If you're inflating your numbers because you're allowing students to be admitted into highly competitive college environments, for instance, like the University of Michigan, that's one of the nation's more competitive universities, and you're allowing students in who don't have on merit, on the grounds of merit alone, don't have the grades to be admitted to a school like that, and you then ban the use of racial preferences, guess what? The numbers go down because now you're saying the students that we're allowing in have the ability to compete and succeed and graduate from this university. What happens is, this is the travesty of so-called affirmative action. It has allowed kids into these highly competitive universities all across the country. Those kids don't have the grades, don't have necessarily the ability to compete. They wind up being frustrated. They will drop out. They will not, and that may be something in their lives that causes them to be less successful than had they gone to a less competitive college and perhaps succeeded. Now, I want your listeners to hear clearly what I'm saying, because I don't want anybody to think I'm saying that black students can't be competitive.
Exactly.
There are tons of competitive black students. They get literally snapped up by all the universities. They're looking for those kids because there's this almost mantra, a religion of diversity. Every university in this country wants highly competitive black students. Once that pool gets exhausted, and I've looked at all the data nationally, it isn't a very high pool of competitive black students because of a whole host of reasons. So what the banning racial preferences has done, it said we want to use merit as the primary reason, not the sole reason, but the primary reason to admit kids onto our campus. That's why the numbers have dropped, and now we have to talk about how we shore up the education of inner-city urban kids to grow the pool to make sure there are more competitive kids that can go to any college they want in the nation.
You're welcome to give a call and ask Joe a question if you'd like at 1-800-357-0910. Joe's a member of the Project 21 Black Leadership Network. Joe R. Hicks we're speaking to right now. You know, you mentioned the left, and I was reading in your bio here, Joe, that in the 60s and into the 90s, your views were more aligned with what you would call the orthodoxy of left liberalism, quote unquote. But you did kind of a re-examination over the years. You know, tell me a little bit about that, because I think it's intriguing.
Well, it's interesting. This coalition to defend affirmative action was fronted by a group called BAM, By Any Means Necessary. It's a Bay Area grouping that I know well.
Okay.
They're highly left. They're crazy as you can possibly imagine, Marxist being in a contemporary American setting. Now, back in about 1968, I would have been agreeing with BAM because that's where my politics were. I'm an old, crazy, old guard leftist, used to be a member of the Communist Party, who luckily came to my senses, and my politics gradually moved to the right, and today, thank God, I'm a functioning, Republican and conservative. So I understand the arguments very well. Problem is, I think they're wrong, they're wrong-headed, and I think they're completely what black communities that are struggling with things like education, struggling with things like poverty, struggling with a whole host of issues like criminality that's rampant in all too many communities in this country, and to have these leftist groups not saying and not promoting the kinds of things that will assist these communities, I think is just really a travesty.
You know, you mentioned something about promoting, and I worry in our country. I worry, first of all, when we talk about the black bloc of voters. I mean, it's almost dehumanizes people. I mean, no one's like that. I mean, now, if you say, do they vote like that? Did they vote like that for President Obama? Yes, it was an unbelievable number, but that's the first problem that I have. And the fact that anybody buys into that who might be black is a bothersome thing to me as well, as far as being a fellow citizen on this earth. The second part that bothers me is the enabling right now of people to continue to remain in more of a dependent status, either psychologically or actually physically. And the third part is, the fact that we're promoting that. Our government seems to want to promote that you're dependent, that we'll tell you where to vote, we'll tell you where to go, we'll tell you what to do, we'll tell you what jobs are okay, we'll tell you that it's okay to try to crawl into the middle class as opposed to the sky is the limit. I mean, does that make any sense at all?
Well, it makes, what you just said makes sense. The kind of mindset that ultimately black Americans have bought into is what doesn't make sense. And it's really interesting, Gary, because you can look at the trajectory of black Americans' country that
right
around the time of the civil rights movement, all the indicators were on the upswing. That comes to a damn near a screeching halt in the 1960s when the welfare mentality that got promoted not necessarily by black leaders, but by white radical activists that sold a bill of goods that black people are victims and they need the government to come to their aid to help them. Now, that help looked more often than not like welfare dependency that locked generations of black people into that kind of dependency. On top of that, that dependency got rooted in the Democratic Party. So a lot of young black people came to age thinking that the Democratic Party was like was like Santa Claus. It was the source of all things. It was mommy, it was daddy, it was the source of income. It was all of those things. You didn't have to work necessarily, and so the work ethic got damaged greatly during that period of time. So all of that is what we see when we look at, polling figures that show something like almost 96% of all black Americans walked into a polling booth and voted for Barack Obama. Now, I'm not criticizing the vote. If they thought that he was the best man,
right, exactly.
Fine. But what was behind that was this notion of black victimization that said, we're going to vote for a black president who's also a Democrat. That doubles up on the whole equation. Black president, Democrat, stuff has got to get awfully good in America. Well, as we know, it's simply none of that. Santa Claus never delivered, in other words.
Well, and I would dare say that there's not 96% of anybody that agrees with anything on the country other than that one number, baby, because, we don't see numbers like that ever. I want to bring a guest in here also with us, a caller right now. Joe R. Hicks is our guest this morning with Project 21 Black Leadership Network. David York, go ahead. It's your turn to make the call. You're with Joe Hicks.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, Dave.
I read about that decision in the Wall Street Journal this morning, and I would just like to read you a quote from a concurring opinion written by Justice Scalia and agreed to by Justice Thomas, which says to me that of the justices on the court, those are the only two that ever actually read the Constitution and apply it to their decisions. And it goes like this: we confront a frighteningly bizarre question. Does the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment forbid what its text plainly requires?
Brilliant analysis on Scalia's point, by the way. And it points out the absurdity of the arguments that were being made. What I found fascinating was Sotomayor's dissent, in which she said basically, and it was something that really got enjoined dramatically by Scalia, who took her on, because she said that the ruling, the 6-2 ruling, was wishing away racism. Now, you've got to have a very interesting view of America to believe in contemporary America racism is actually the major thing that is stunting the development of black people or other minorities in this country. And this is, Sotomayor's writing is what all of us who opposed her nomination to court saw coming, because we knew what an ideologue she is and was at that point. And her dissent, a very lengthy dissent, which I managed to get through last night with several cups of coffee, it indicates why this is a young woman that's going to be on that court for a long, long time, and she's going to be a problem for people that disagree with that kind of leftist view of race relations and a leftist view of America.
And Joe, in essence, what she said yesterday, according to the way Scalia looked at it, he said, he regards what she said as a shameful, quote unquote, suggestion that the Michigan voters who decided to ban affirmative action in college admissions were motivated by racism. I mean, to make that assumption, I guess, especially from a Supreme Court justice, is a pretty long assumption and a very dangerous one, I think.
Well, it is, and here's what's so absurd about what she wrote and about what a lot of leftists think. So here you had this ballot measure in Michigan that literally lifted language out of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, banning discrimination on the basis of race, sex, national origin, long list of, reasons that you can't discriminate. So it was a measure banning discrimination, yet Sotomayor has the audacity and others saying that's racist for you to ban discrimination. Now, how twisted can your logic be? And that's what Scalia was again pointing out here, was that the 14th Amendment either means what it says or it doesn't, and you have a woman sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court that says it doesn't mean what it says.
Yeah. Joe, when we come back, I want to ask you a question. What good did affirmative action do, if any, in your opinion, and is it still necessary to have it in any context today here in the country? We're going to ask Joe R. Hicks that question when we come back. He's with Project 21 Black Leadership Network and a whole host of other jobs he's done over the years. He'll be back with us here on The Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Welcome back to The Gary Sutton Show on WSBA with Joe R. Hicks, a member of the Project 21 Black Leadership Network, also the Vice President of Community Advocates Incorporated, a privately funded Los Angeles-based political think tank Joe, we're talking about the affirmative action ruling yesterday by the court, the Supreme Court, and I know you read this, but for people out there that didn't hear this is what Sotomayor in her dissent opened with by describing 3 stages of, quote, the majority, unquote, discriminating against racial minorities in the political process, beginning with the Jim Crow laws that flouted the 15th Amendment. And she went in and said this, quote, this time, although it allowed the minority access to the political process, the majority changed the ground rules of this process so as to make it more difficult for the minority and the minority alone to obtain policies designed to foster racial integration. Although these political restructurings may not have been discriminatory in purpose, the court reaffirmed the right of minority members of our society to participate meaningfully and equally in the political process. The case involves the last chapter, or this case involves the last chapter of discrimination. She went on to say, I, of course, do not suggest that Michigan's voters acted with anything like the insidious or invidious intent of those who historically stymied the rights of racial minorities, but like earlier chapters of political restructuring, the Michigan Amendment at issue, in this case, changed the rules of the political process to the disadvantage of minority members of our society. And after I read this, I kind of wrote a note to myself. Does that mean we have to look at everything through the eyes of race? I thought we were trying to get away from that in this country.
The answer is from the perspective of someone like Sonia Sotomayor and a host of others in this country, including perhaps Barack Obama. The answer is yes. Race has become this, interestingly enough, just as we've reached a point in this nation's history where race has declined amazingly in its significance in the lives of, black people or, Latinos or other, so-called minorities in this country, you get this rise in this sort of race talk on the part of leadership or Supreme Court justices or, attorney generals in the case of Eric Holder that seem obsessed with this notion of race. And I think most Americans walk around, they're riding up and down elevators, they're on their way to work, they're picking up their kids, they're going to church on Sunday. They don't get up in the morning thinking about race. Now it's only these people, the elites, that do, and that's a real problem. And your reading of Sotomayor's sort of twisted sort of language there. I mean, talk about twisting into a pretzel to make her racial point. I mean, that's a primary example of that kind of social justice thinking that's sort of found its way into legal jargon, and I find it very appalling. It's a complete misreading of where this nation is on the issue of race, because most Americans, with exception of some communities that are, still, kind of thinking about seeing themselves as victims.
Right.
Most Americans aren't thinking about race when they get up in the morning, and they treat people with kindness and with respect, and they afford people dignity, because that's just who Americans are. And it's almost slanderous to hear somebody like Sotomayor give you that kind of reading and then say that the Supreme Court's ruling or the Michigan attempt to ban racial preferences was changing the rules. Well, the rules had been changed in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
So would she claim that was the same case when America, put into place the 64 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act? Those changed the game or changed the rules. So you get some very twisted, I think, and interesting leftist political logic at work here.
One final question for you, Joe, before I leave you. Is Sotomayor in essence asking in today's climate for more rights instead of equal rights? In other words, we're saying, okay, therefore, nothing has changed since 1954. Right. Nothing has changed since 1963 and 64 in the early 60s. So, therefore, we need more rights so the society will look a certain way instead of the society actually authentically being a certain way.
Yeah, it's kind of this attempt to, for liberals and leftists to engineer society in a utopian kind of quest to make the nation something that it can never be, or the world something it can never be. I often tell people, I'm sure you see in on cars back there where you are, there's a sign that a lot of liberals, bumper sticker a lot of liberals ride around with on the car, says eracism. Yes. In other words, we need to erase racism. Well, I would argue we've done a damn good job of doing that in this country. Nonetheless, you can't you can't eliminate the stupid gene from the human gene.
Exactly.
There will always be people that will dislike somebody for all sorts of arcane reasons. But it's a window into this world that the leftists and liberals live in, where they think we can achieve the utopian kind of quest that they claim they're onto. What I find interesting is, if you look back at great old black leaders like Frederick Douglass, he said, once, all he wanted was, to have black people allowed the rights that everyone else has,
exactly.
And then for the government to get out of the way and let them get about the job of being Americans and competing on the same footing as all other Americans. Now, that's a far cry from what Sotomayor is talking about, because he was, and by the way, as most people may not know, Frederick Douglass was a Republican.
Yeah, which most people would not know, right?
A very different view of, listen, I'm a man in society. All I want is what everybody else is afforded. Get the hell out of the way and let me do my thing. Let me be a free-thinking, independent human being. And that's not what today's social engineers want. You're right. They want more than just civil rights. They want to engineer the kind of world that they think it should be. And in doing so would create a nation that I think you or I would simply not want to live in.
Joe, it's always a pleasure having you as a guest. Thank you so much. I look forward eagerly to our next time we talk about hopefully something a little bit more positive than this. We can get by this darn conversation. But thank you again for your insights.
Exactly. Hey, always good to be with you, Gary.
Take care. Thank you.